It's just not as sharp as it could be. Now here it is in DxO PureRAW. Much more detail and even more low noise. Hello everybody. So I am going to do a demonstration on DxO PureRAW and its noise reduction capabilities. So yesterday I took 3 images for this demonstration at high ISOs. So I'll go through 3 images, each getting progressively higher in its ISO, just to show off what the program DxO PureRAW is capable of when it comes to noise reduction and its noise reduction technology. So these images were taken on my Lumix GH5, a micro 4/3 camera. So the full frame equivalent for the ISOs that I shot at would be 2 steps higher. So this image here was shot at ISO 6400. ISO 6400, which should be equivalent to an ISO of 25,600 on a full frame, I think. So I take ISO 6400, times it by 2, 12,800, and then times it by 2 again for another step, the second step, and it would be 25,600 ISO on a full frame. So very high ISO. So I'm going to zoom in, and here you can see quite a bit of noise. Zoomed out, it doesn't look that bad because when an image is exposed properly, you don't really notice that much noise, or at least the noise is minimized significantly. It's when an image is not exposed properly and you're shooting at a high ISO, then when you raise the exposure in post, it really brings out the noise. That's why that's why if you're shooting at a high ISO, exposure becomes even more important when it comes to noise reduction. So I shot these 3 images. So here's one that I shot, ISO 6400. Then I shot another image, ISO 8000. Still doesn't look too bad when zoomed out because once again, when it's exposed properly, you don't really notice the noise that much. And then I shot a 3rd image, very high ISO, especially for a micro 4/3 camera, ISO 12,800, which is equivalent, on a full frame camera, that's equivalent to 51,200. Wow, 51,200 ISO on a full frame camera. That is a very high ISO. And when I zoom in here at 100%, you can really see the noise in the shadows. And there's a lot of shadow in this image anyway. But it was exposed properly. So when an image is exposed properly, the noise is going to be reduced. So it just goes to show this image, while it is noisy, it would be even worse if this was underexposed to begin with and then I brought it up to this level in post. Okay, so what did I do? I took these 3 images today and I dragged them into DxO PureRAW. And let's see the results. So earlier today I opened up DxO PureRAW and I dragged my RAW files straight off the SD card into the program. The program is very easy to use. It's just drag and drop. Once my images are in there, I click Process Photos in the top left. After I clicked on Process Photos, my settings are very straightforward. I use the DeepPRIME option. For the optical corrections, I turn off global lens sharpening, but I keep on lens distortion correction. The reason why I turn off global lens sharpening is because I only want the fine detail to be enhanced. I find if there's global lens sharpening, it can kind of make the image look fake and it has this plastic look to the image. So then I just process those images. It says estimated time is 19 minutes. That's what it said. Look, it goes down to 16 minutes. It didn't take that long to process these 3 images. That might sound like a long time, 12 minutes or whatever, but it's certainly well worth the wait if you really want a clean image. And this is using that program. I actually used it on my MacBook Air, 2019 MacBook Air with an Intel processor. The M1 Mac Mini, which I use for my desktop computer, it's a lot faster using this program. Okay, so now we're back in Lightroom, and let's take a look at the results. So I have my RAW files straight from my GH5 here in Lightroom. I also have the processed using DxO PureRAW image here in Lightroom as well for the comparison. Okay, so here's the Lightroom file. Here it is. No noise reduction applied. Except for the default here in Lightroom. There's always color noise reduction applied by default. Colors at 25, detail at 50, smoothness at 50. That's standard for anybody that uses Lightroom. There's always some noise reduction applied to your RAW file, but there's no luminance noise reduction applied, just the color noise. That's always there by default, even if you're shooting at a very low ISO. Color noise is still applied because even at low ISOs, color noise still shows up when it comes to RAW images, when it comes to RAW photos. So, just for the sake of this tutorial, let's just say that there's no noise reduction applied. And really, I don't consider there to be any noise reduction applied because, yes, while there's color noise reduction applied, the luminance noise is still at 0. And color noise, it's always on there by default anyway. So here it is, zoomed out all the way, ISO 6400. So I'm just looking. The detail is still there. There's some good detail in this image, and I used a very sharp lens. It's the Lumix Leica 12-60 2.5. I'm sorry, the Lumix Leica 12-60 f2.8 to f4. Very, very sharp lens, and there's a lot of detail there. Now, a concern with noise reduction is that when you apply noise reduction, you're going to lose some detail. And that is true. I mean, you can have a very clean looking image, but the image could end up looking ridiculous. It'll look like this plastic, smooth, mushy mess. It's kind of like the look on smartphones when you're shooting in low light, and then you look at your image and you zoom in on a subject and the skin tones, the person's face. It just looks very mushy and smeared. That's because the tiny sensors in smartphones need a lot of noise reduction if you're going to have a clean looking image. Okay, I mean, micro four thirds is considered a small sensor perhaps compared to a micro four thirds, but I mean, a micro four thirds, it's considered a small sensor compared to a full frame, but compared to a smartphone, an iPhone, for example, the micro four thirds sensor is huge in comparison. Okay, so with Lightroom, I'm going to apply some noise. I'm just going to apply enough so that the noise is, it's getting close to being gone. So I'll just drag the luminance slider here to the right. Okay. And I actually didn't drag it too much. Okay, I dragged it to 37. Okay, so I dragged that to 37. And here's the before. Here's the after. Less noisy, yes. But when I look at this guitar string, the high E string, or I'm sorry, the low E string, the ridges on this guitar string are not as sharp. The detail is not showing up as well. Here's the before. And here's the after. So before, much more detail. I mean, I'm pixel peeping, but it's still noticeable. The image does not look as sharp. Looks less noisy, sure, when I zoom back out. Here's the before. Here's the after. I mean, it looks fine viewing the image like this, but if you're going to blow this up to billboard size, perhaps, and you're up close, you're going to notice a loss in detail. But then again, perhaps it's just me because I'm kind of pixel peeping here. Okay, so let's keep that noise reduction on, and let's go to this same image, but only processed in DxO PureRAW. Okay, here it is in DxO PureRAW. And wow, look at the detail on the low E string. That detail is absolutely amazing. Not only is the image low noise, but there's a lot more detail on this string. I can really see the ridges on the low E string on the guitar. Okay, let's do a comparison. I'm just going to adjust these images so that I can do a better comparison. Okay, here's the Lightroom image. Not as noisy as it was, but the detail, while the detail is still there, it's just not as sharp as it could be. Now here it is in DxO PureRAW. Much more detail and even more low noise. So not only is it less noisy, there's more detail there. And it doesn't look fake. This looks good. This looks like a pretty good image. I like it. Even on the rest of my headstock of my guitar, the detail is still there. Made in USA, Fender, Stratocaster. That's a good image. Here's the Lightroom image. Here's the DxO PureRAW image using the DeepPRIME. Now zoomed out all the way, it's kind of hard to tell the difference. But when I zoom in, that's when I really see the detail. The detail shows up a lot more on the DxO PureRAW file. Okay, and as you can see, when you drag the DxO PureRAW image into Lightroom, there's no sharpening applied, no noise reduction applied either, because that was already done in DxO PureRAW. Now, I do prefer Lightroom. I use it for cataloging my images. I just like the interface of Lightroom. But sometimes I'll use DxO PureRAW, depending on what a client wants or depending on what I think is best for the image. So I'm in no way knocking Lightroom. Lightroom is excellent, and perhaps if I were to go to Lightroom and maybe mess with these sliders a little bit more, maybe I could get this looking a little bit more close to the DxO PureRAW image, but I've tried it before and I don't think I could get it as good as DxO PureRAW. So I would just rather drag and drop in DxO PureRAW when it comes to those situations. Okay, so this is ISO 6400. Now let's go to even higher ISO image, ISO 8000. Okay, so the Blessed Virgin Mary. Very noisy image, but there's still some detail here. There's still detail on her cloak. There's still good fine detail there. And once again, if an image is exposed properly, like this image, the noise doesn't show up that much. Unless I zoom in, then I can see the noise. And it's not really all that bad. To me, it's still a usable image. But for the sake of the demonstration, let's apply some noise reduction. So I'll drag the luminance slider again to the right. I'll go with ISO, or luminance, I'll put it at 47. There we go, luminance 47. Okay, so there's not much noise. It does look like it's a little bit too smooth, perhaps, so I'll just back that off a bit. Bring it down to 34. Okay. So there it is. Less noise. There's still some good detail there. Good detail here on Mary's cloak. Some detail here on the Immaculate Heart. Okay. Now let's go to the DxO PureRAW image. And wow, even zoomed out all the way, it just looks like the details are popping more. And the sharpening, I only use fine detail enhancement with DxO PureRAW. And already it just looks like there's more detail. Look at that cloak. Wow, I'm actually very, very impressed with this image. This image was shot at ISO 8000. And look at how good it looks when using DxO PureRAW. Wow. I don't really notice any noise at all. if somebody gave me this image and they said it was shot at ISO 100, I would be inclined to believe them. But no, this was shot at ISO 8000. So that's the only way that I would know. I'd have to drag it into Lightroom and then look up here and say, oh, ISO 8000. Okay, must have used some type of program on the negative. And not only is this image less noisy, it's, wow, there's just more detail there. Let's do a comparison. Wow. Here's the Lightroom image, or the image with Lightroom noise reduction applied. And here it is without any noise reduction in Lightroom, and just viewing it in Lightroom. And here we are looking at what DxO DeepPRIME can do in the DxO PureRAW file, or the DxO PureRAW software. Wow, excellent. Okay, and then a third image that I'm going to use for the demonstration, ISO 12,800. Very high ISO. Once again, that's 51,200 on a full frame. And just back to the image here of Mary. 8,000 ISO, so that would be 32,000 ISO on a full frame camera. And wow. I'm just absolutely amazed looking at this image. Wow. Okay, let's go to the DxO PureRAW. Okay, so this is DxO PureRAW. Here's my audio interface. So zoomed in on it. Can't really see much noise. Go into the shadow area. Not much noise. Here's the edge of my hard drive. I can see the edge of my hard drive. The detail is still there. I can see the little scuff marks here on the edge of my hard drive enclosure. And this is with noise reduction applied. Noise reduction, which is notorious for sacrificing detail for the sake of having low noise, but there's still some good detail there. Now let's go to the image without DxO PureRAW. Okay, so very, very noisy. This is very noisy. There's detail there, but when I look at the detail on the DxO PureRAW, perhaps it's even better. It seems like it's much better on the DxO PureRAW. Okay, let's apply some noise reduction here in Lightroom. So I'll drag this luminance slider. I'll drag it to 27. 38. Okay, we'll go with 38. And the detail looks better in DxO PureRAW. DxO PureRAW doesn't even look that fake. Zoomed out all the way, it looks like a low noise image. But it's not. This is a very high ISO image. I can still read the letters, the numbers here on the audio interface. You can see the quality of the bokeh. My computer that was in the foreground, it's blurred out. These wires and cables are blurred out. And it's just focused here on the audio interface, and it still looks good. Now here it is, without DxO PureRAW, and just a little bit of noise reduction in Lightroom. Image does not look too bad. It looks pretty good. I go up here in the shadows, and then you can see the noise. DxO PureRAW. There's less noise, but perhaps this is where we get to diminishing returns. Once, maybe there's less of a wow factor the higher the ISO is to begin with. Or maybe it's just this particular image. I'm just not as wowed as I was with the image of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So Blessed Virgin Mary, ISO 8000, and here it is, DxO PureRAW. Much better. Wow, the detail on this cloak is just absolutely amazing. Okay, so back to the audio interface. I'm not really sure which image that I would prefer. I mean, when it comes to detail here on the hard drive, I think I'd prefer the DeepPRIME example. Although it still looks pretty good. The raw file straight out of the camera with some noise reduction applied. But if I wanted a very clean image, if a client demanded a clean image, or if I was, doing stock photography, a lot of stock photography sites, they want an image with pretty much no noise in it, then I would hand this off. To me, there's no noise in this image. You may as well say that this is a low ISO image when it comes to, I don't know, the ISO standards of certain stock photography sites. So that's pretty impressive. Okay, so that's me just demonstrating what DxO PureRAW can do. Thank you for watching.